Good morning, everyone, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Welcome to our AAA Northeast Town Hall, Road Race, the alarming increase in speeding on Massachusetts roadways. I'm Mary McGuire, Director of Public and Legislative Affairs, and I work in traffic safety alongside a wonderful team from AAA. We aim to educate, to inform, and to pass laws that make our roads safer. And we've worked toward that goal with many of you stakeholders participating in this town hall today, so we thank you for that. So welcome to all of you, and hello to all of our gracious speakers who have given up their time on a very busy week here in the Commonwealth. You are also longtime partners in the efforts to prioritize safety for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists here in Massachusetts. I'll introduce our speakers in just a moment, but let me briefly first set the stage. If you ventured out during the coronavirus crisis and spent any time on the roadways, you've probably noticed two things. One, the decline in traffic congestion compared with the first 2 months of this year, and two, the deadly hazard that our more open roadways have paved the way for, excessive speeding. I should also tell you at the outset that this event is being recorded. We'll send out the recording to those of you who are not able to join today at 11, and hopefully, since this is my first virtual broadcast, one of my cats doesn't walk across the screen, but you'll understand that that does happen. So with us today to talk about this disturbing trend in Massachusetts, the alarming numbers and potential solutions that we can all work on, are a distinguished panel of 5 traffic safety experts and public officials. MassDOT Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver probably knows the roads of the Commonwealth better than anyone else. He has served in the post since 2017 and joined MassDOT in 2009, overseeing the highway and bridge system of central Massachusetts. Colonel Christopher Mason heads the Massachusetts State Police and took the helm there in November of 2019. He and his officers witnessed speeding firsthand. Jeff Larson has been Massachusetts Director of Highway Safety since 2015, and prior to that was the Executive Director of Safe Roads Alliance, as well as a traffic reporter for many years. Galen Mook is an avid cyclist and Executive Director of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition. And Stacy Butel is a champion for pedestrians as Executive Director of Walk Boston. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this conversation. Before we get started, there are a few ground rules for our virtual town hall. We'll hear first from our speakers, and as I said, we want this to be an informal dialogue, so feel free to jump in at any time, and we invite audience questions from the very start, as well as your comments. But we'd also like to hear from you, our audience, formally. So as soon as our panelists begin laying out the issues for us, we invite all of you on the webinar to type any questions or comments you have into the chat bar on your control panel on the right, and we will share your questions with our speakers throughout the broadcast. Audience microphones will be muted, so you won't be able to speak to ask live questions. And we will also be taking a few quick pauses to do some informal audience polls, so those should be interesting. Again, we'll ask you to chat your answers to those polls to us. We also received a number of questions from those who registered in advance, and we'll certainly try to get to those as well. So let's begin with you, Administrator Gulliver, and again, thanks for being with us. You held a really well-attended press event last month that truly put the issue of speeding in the spotlight in a big way. Can you tell us again about your April 2019 data compared with your April 2020 data, what it tells us about speeding on the roadways and about the fatality rate?
So thank you, Mary, first off, for holding this session today. You know, getting the message out there about this, the problems that we've been seeing on the roadways, especially over the last couple of months, is always a welcome opportunity for us. So the issues that we saw really exposed themselves right away. As everybody knows, we had a very sharp drop off in traffic volumes right after the stay-at-home advisory happened in March. And along with that traffic volumes dropping, we also saw a pretty large increase in speed. Obviously, if there's no more congestion, you can now do the speed limit on many roadways that we weren't able to do previously. But along with that came a really disturbing trend to us that we saw at the end of the month as accident reports started coming in. And what we were seeing is that our rates, even though the volume of traffic had dropped by as much as 70% across the state, and sometimes in certain segments even more than that, we were seeing that our fatality numbers stayed about the same. So they were in the high 20s for that same period. What that means is that we know that our rate of fatalities doubled during that time period. And had we been in our previous traffic volumes, we would have seen that the actual number of fatalities would have also doubled. But it was a disturbing trend. We were seeing that it impacted not just state highways, but a lot of local roadways as well. In fact, the majority of these crashes were happening on local roadways at intersections and on straightaways, and in many cases involved more than just the driver. In some cases also involved passengers and other cars, and also pedestrians and cyclists. And so this was a really tough trend that we wanted to reverse. That's why we really went out there hard with the numbers a few weeks back and have continued to press this. We now are starting to see traffic volumes return, and we don't want to lose focus on this really tough trend here. And we want to make sure that as people return to the roadways, that they're driving as safely as possible and continuing to make sure that they are aware of their surroundings. I think that's been one of the primary issues, is that people are taking advantage of the low traffic volumes. They're speeding. They're not expecting that there's other road users out there now, and now they're encountering people that are normally not on the roads. We know that there's a lot more pedestrians out there. Schools got out early, so there's a lot of kids that are out walking on the sides of roads, on sidewalks, on bicycles. So there's a lot of other road users that people need to be aware of, and they're going to continue to encounter those as traffic volumes return.
So I just heard you say that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. I think this is a trend that we need to keep a real focus on and make sure that people, as they get behind the wheel, are going to drive safely and really observe others out there.
So I just heard you make the point that we've got a lot of teens out on the roadways, and they were out there early, some as early as March. How big a concern is it for you that the months from June through the end of August are the 100 deadliest days for teens, as we say at the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety and elsewhere? What are your concerns for young and experienced drivers on the roadways with the evidence of so many people speeding out there?
Well, it's very concerning, and especially if the number of drivers that have been on the roadway with the volume so low. This is just a completely changed environment from what Massachusetts drivers have been used to. So people that have picked up driving habits dealing with heavier congestion, and all of a sudden they're presented with this completely new and novel situation on the roadways, and we really need them to adjust. And they did not have that slow adjustment period to get used to, as unfortunately we did the traffic congestion previously. This was all of a sudden a complete sharp drop off of traffic across the board. So we remain really, really concerned, especially for not just the teen drivers, but especially them, but also people have not been driving, period, over the last few months. And as they return to work, they're getting behind the wheel for the first time in a couple of months now, or getting behind the wheel more regularly for the first time in a couple of months. And we need them to really heed everybody's advice and drive safely.
I think that's such a great point. I haven't driven as much. I'm used to commuting to work 2 hours back and forth every day, and I feel rusty when I go out on the roadway. So I think that's a really tremendous point. Do you have any data for May as to what we're seeing with regard to speeding yet?
So on speeding, we are definitely starting to see some of the early data roll in, and the average speed has absolutely increased across our interstates. The typical, it's hard to say what the typical one is across the board, but the ranges that we're seeing is that the rates are above, at least 10 miles per hour above the speed limit in many, many areas, as much as 15 in some areas as well. And then that's during typical drive times. If you look at it in the middle of the night when there's much fewer people on the road, speeds have always increased, and that remains the case right now. And I know that Colonel Mason can probably speak to this more, but we are seeing some more incidents of people traveling way farther excess of 15 miles per hour over the speed limit in some areas.
So Jonathan, thank you for that segue. And Colonel Mason, let's move to you. And again, thank you for carving out time. I know you've been out every night this week with your troops, and you've had an incredibly busy week here in the Commonwealth. So we thank you for your service and thank you for being here today. So Administrator Gulliver just mentioned that we are seeing an increase in the number of citations written to those who are not only speeding, but who are going at 100 miles an hour or more. Can you talk about what you're seeing out there on the roadways, Colonel?
Sure. Let me start, Mary, by thanking you and Mark at AAA for putting this together, and thanking everybody that's watching and submitting questions. So let me start by highlighting some of that Massachusetts State Police citation data that that John just referred to. I can tell you that during the first 5 months of 2019, so from January 1 to May 31, the state police issued just shy of 148,000 motor vehicle citations. 35% of those citations were for speeding. So during that same 5-month period in 2020, we wrote approximately 101,000 citations. While the number of citations decreased, largely due to the restrictions and the distancing conventions that were adopted relative to COVID-19, we saw that the percentage of citations issued for speeding increased to 38%. So we really saw that that citation data was aligning with the hard data that Jonathan and the people over at Mass DOT were providing, and kind of the anecdotal information that both the state police troopers were reporting, and then certainly that the public was reporting that they were observing every day on the open roadways. I think anybody that's driven the Commonwealth roadways recently knows that that some are using this pandemic and the decreased traffic as an opportunity to or an invitation to speed. In fact, recently, May 23rd, in fact, in Troop C, which is in central Massachusetts, we held a directed speed enforcement detail that ran from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. During that patrol, 30 civil motor vehicle citations for speeding were written. Of those, 22 motorists were stopped for speeds between 90 and 100 miles an hour, and 3 were stopped for speeds over or in excess of 100 miles per hour. That's occurring right on our Commonwealth roads. And so I think you get a sense of how dangerous and how risky the roads have become in some places. So we've seen similar trends in speeds at various other directed patrols we've had. So this isn't anything that's unique to central Massachusetts. We see it across the breadth of the Commonwealth. And as you know, Mary, with speed predictably comes more serious and fatal motor vehicle crashes. So for the MSP, promoting safer roadways through education and enforcement is right at the heart of our mission. So to fulfill that goal, we've partnered up with EOPS. We've leveraged that Mass DOT data, the MSP data, and we've implemented a number of programs to promote highway safety and target speeding and aggressive driving and dangerous driving behaviors. So one of those programs is the Sustained Traffic Enforcement Program, or STEP program. That's one such program. So we held 7 enforcement events. Those each consist of a 4-officer enforcement team. They were held in the 5 geographic troops across the Commonwealth with the intent to stop, identify, and take enforcement action on operators of vehicles traveling at very high speeds. Between April 21 and May 20 of this year, 1,426 citations were issued as a result of those program efforts. We looked at those efforts. We conducted, a quick analysis of those efforts and looked at the MSP crashes that we responded to, just state police, for a 27-day period from March 25th to May 19th of this year. And we noted that there were 6,272 crashes during that period of time, which reflected a 6% increase over the prior 27-day period. So, concerning that we would see that increase. The good news, or the better news, was that we then looked at the MSP crashes in the areas which the dedicated speed enforcement occurred, and we noted that that increase had been depressed, and we only saw an increase of 1% there. While still an unacceptable increase, we were heartened that those speed enforcement efforts seemed to be generating results and seemed to be generating voluntary compliance, which at the end of the day is always what we're looking to do.
So, Colonel, one of the things I was really encouraged to see is that I know that one of those campaigns involved urging people to buckle up, to wear seatbelts, because it seems to me that at this time it's even more critically important to obey the law of the Commonwealth and make sure that you are restrained. Can you talk about that? And I know you also have another enforcement campaign starting this weekend.
That's right. So, we've been partnered with AAA in trying to educate the public as to the importance of wearing seatbelts, not only, from, the legal requirement, but just the common sense practical requirement. If you're operating on roadways that in some ways are riskier and people are engaging in more dangerous behaviors, why wouldn't you take a simple step to mitigate that risk? And by buckling that seatbelt, that's really a very proactive first common sense step that you can take.
It sure is. Tell us about the campaign that you're launching this weekend, June 7th, I believe. You have another enforcement campaign coming up. Can you tell us about that?
We do. We have a speed and aggressive driving enforcement campaign that'll be kicking off on June 7th. It'll run through June 30th. So again, that will occur in all 5 geographic troops. Will consist of 60 teams of 8 officers. They'll be focused on reducing crashes and fatalities through stopping motor vehicles that are speeding or driving in a reckless manner. We want people to be safe, not only for themselves, but for the safety of the other motorists on the roadways. We really don't need to. You've seen the signs that MassDOT has up on the roadways, and I think it highlights a very important point, one that might not leap to the motorist's mind right away, but we really don't need to add to an already stressed health system through serious injuries or fatalities, or treatment of people that are involved in these motor vehicle crashes. So I think that's an important aspect, and that's something that we can all do immediately to help.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that's a tremendous message to send. Let's keep people safe on the roadway so that we don't stress our healthcare system any more than it's already taxed. I think that's a tremendous point. So thank you, Colonel. We'll get back to you more in a moment. I know we have some questions about distracted driving enforcement as well. And Jeff, we're going to talk to you about that message board campaign that the Colonel referenced. But first, let's get our audience involved here with our first poll question. So the question, which I think Alex Slatke is now going to put up on the screen and you should see pop up, is have you in our audience here today at the town hall seen an increase in speeding on the highways or roadways where you live in the last few months? So again, you can click on any one of 5 options and we'll give you the results. You've seen a large increase in speeding. Have you seen a slight increase in speeding? Have you seen no change, a slight decrease in speeding, or a large decrease in speeding? And let's take a look here and see what we're seeing in terms of answers. Okay. So it looks like, in terms of results, that the majority of those who have voted so far, 51%, just over half, are seeing at least a slight increase in speeding, but there's also a big number of you, 44%, who report seeing a large increase in speeding. So that's certainly significant. I know I've seen it when I've gone out on the roadways. I've seen a lot of people driving 90 and 100 miles an hour. No change, 5%, and it looks like no one has noticed any kind of a decrease in speeding. So I think that's significant as well. So Jeff Larson, our Highway Safety Director, and thank you everybody for responding to that poll. It's great to have your input in the audience. Jeff, I know that you have spent so much time over the years working on campaigns to enforce speeding, distracted driving, seatbelt use. And for many years now here in the Commonwealth, we've enjoyed one of the lowest fatality rates in the nation, or been close to the lowest. Traffic congestion has certainly been a factor in that in terms of slowing people down. But what's your reaction as Highway Safety Director when you see this increase in people speeding and in the doubling of the fatality rate April to April?
Well, it's obviously a problem. You know, when things shut down initially, EOPS personnel were still coming to work. And when I was driving in and out, on the first days that we were traveling around without traffic, was just noticing how aggressive drivers had come just immediately. And I called Colonel Mason's people over at State Police, and we talked about it and started raising the issue as something that's a concern. We started seeing it across the country as well. I was talking to highway safety directors across the country, and almost uniformly, that's what they were seeing in other states. The folks in Michigan were seeing increases in fatalities. North Carolina and Minnesota saw a big jump. So this is not something that was unique to Massachusetts. It's something that we saw everywhere. So we started to think about what we could do. You know, enforcement's a big piece of it. That is important for all of those issues, for seatbelts, for distracted driving, for speed. But enforcement at that point was a significant challenge, just because there are issues with social distancing that are required in the process of policing. And so things are a little bit different on that front. So we just started to realize that we needed to get people to know about the problem. So I commend Administrator Gulliver and MassDOT for having that press event some time ago that just said, hey, we have a problem here, let's pay attention to it. That was important to just make people realize that what was happening on the roads and to get people to think about it. It's one of those things. When you're driving down the road, I normally drive like a grandpa. I don't exceed the speed limit very often, but when the roads are wide open, you start to realize you are going a little bit faster. I realized that. The first time that I had somebody coming up behind me in an aggressive manner during the closure, I looked down at my own speed and I was going faster than I normally do. It's because you're dealing with an open road. So education it's an important piece of what we needed to do. So we developed in partnership with MassDOT a campaign, which is a small campaign. It's basically run on social media. It's being put on billboards, and MassDOT has them on the VMS signs. It basically says just help our heroes. Please don't speed. It's just a note to get people to realize that medical personnel are dealing with other issues, and it's not only medical personnel but police who are our heroes. It's everybody who's out there who has been working through this COVID crisis and during the closure. We don't need to be distracted by the crashes that result from speed. That's what we've been trying to do. We had last year started working on a New England-wide campaign to try to bring attention to speed as an issue throughout New England, partnering with all six of all of the other 5 New England states to focus on speed. We weren't able to complete that because of the crisis as it came through, but we've recognized speed as an issue in Massachusetts for quite some time. It's about 1/3 of the fatalities that happen here and across the country, and it's a real problem for us. But I'm very glad to see that state police have just really stepped up to attend to it, and great with our partners at MassDOT. One of the things that I think is really important to realize, and I think Stacy and Galen will talk about this, is that as we move forward, we really have to be aware that people's travel is going to change. People have a different mindset now about how they're going to be getting around, whether they're going to be using mass transportation. I know a lot of people who are thinking about biking to work and looking at alternative means of transportation. That means that we need to start thinking about what we can do to make sure that those vulnerable users are safe on the roads, whether they're pedestrians or bicyclists or anybody else. And that may mean engineering changes. It's certainly an awareness effort that needs to be done, but things are going to be different moving forward.
Well, I think that's a really important point, and we're going to talk about that with Galen about the surge and the number of cyclists. Repairs are up, bike sales are up, so you're absolutely right, Jeff. Let's talk about distraction for a minute too as a factor, because I know Administrator Gulliver, you had referenced distraction as another factor in this doubling of the fatality rate from April 2019 to April 2020. What are you seeing out there, Jeff, in terms of distracted driving and distracted driving enforcement, and how do you think it's going with the implementation of the new law?
Well, it's a little hard to tell because the data is still fairly new coming in. And when the shutdown happened, we were just going into a period when enforcement activity through the month of April, which is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, was really going to hit hard, and that changed things a lot. We were fortunate in terms of the timing of when the law took effect, that we had done a lot of awareness at the front end of it back in January and February, and we had made people aware that this law is coming around. But we haven't been able to focus on it as much as we would have liked because of the obvious problems that we've had in the country and in the world. But I think what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to come back on the other side of this and make sure that people remember that there is now a hands-free law in Massachusetts, because it's so much about awareness. And I know that Colonel Mason is aware of the importance of making sure that the enforcement is a part of this process as well. But this is one of those situations, and I hate to use it as a phrase, but time will tell. We need to keep banging the drum, making sure that people understand that it's not only dangerous, but it's now the law.
Well, I think you're exactly right, and that's certainly what we're trying to do today at AAA is to keep banging the drum. And you're absolutely right that speeding and holding a cell phone or talking on the phone is a deadly combination because when you're traveling way too fast, you have much less time to react. So all good points. So we talked about cyclists briefly, and we now want to get the perspective of Galen Mook. And Jeff, thank you to you. Galen, I have to tell you, I've been riding my bike almost every evening just to get some exercise, good for social as well. And I know bike stores have been slammed and repairs are way up. So as Jeff referenced, there are many more cyclists, and Stacy, I think we're going to find out pedestrians as well on our roadways, which means that communication between all parties is even more vitally important. And we all need to know the rules of the road. So I know you have a presentation for us. Why don't you launch right into us and tell us what the thoughts of the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition are on these issues of speeding and distraction.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary, for having me to represent the organization. Good to see you, Jonathan and Jeff and Colonel. Good to meet you too. I'm proud to be on this panel with Stacy, one of our compatriots here. So real quick, just a few slides to flow through. So Mass Bike does statewide bicycle advocacy, and a lot of that depends on getting good data. So I picked 2 data points to show some of the trends that are happening out there. One on the left is from the Friends of the Columbia Greenway Rail Trail out in Westfield. It's kind of just south in the Pioneer Valley, right on the way to Connecticut. And we're seeing an increase of trail usage over 133% from last year. So we've more than doubled the amount of cyclists who are actually riding specifically in Westfield. Now, Westfield is relatively, it's kind of a combination of suburban and rural. So I juxtapose that with a trend on the right, which is a little hard to see because of the size, but that's the Eco Bike Counter in Kendall Square in Cambridge, right outside Broadway. And this is a year snapshot. And you can see right around March 20 that it dropped precipitously, obviously because people were not commuting in. So I put these 2 slides up here to show that there is a distinction between who is riding out there. We are seeing more cyclists that are out there. Bike shops are sold out of entry-level hybrid bikes. You can't buy them until at least August. E-bikes are on the rise. We are literally breaking every record book on a bike shop sale. So I'm wondering who is riding. And these 2 trends show it's not the commuter rides. It is honestly the recreational riders. Next slide, please. Thanks, Mary. Some other sad trends that are out there is that we've actually had 3 fatal crashes in our Commonwealth already this year. Of course, 3 does not necessarily make a trend, but I do want to point out that every crash is preventable. One of these crashes up in Ipswich involved a woman who was cited for having a cell phone in her hand and was for texting. One involved a large tractor trailer vehicle in downtown Boston, and one was in Arlington just 2 weeks ago at a well-known intersection that had for a decade or more been cited for being a problem and asked to be fixed. So we know the problems that are out there: texting, large vehicles and trucks, and bad intersections. This is not new, but unfortunately what we're seeing is a prevalence of crashes, probably because ridership is up. Next one, Mary, thanks. So here's a slide that is basically a data point to show roughly who we see as the riders that are out there. There are 4 types. There's the interested but concerned, which is really what we're focusing on, which is 60% of the ridership, which are not riding right now. 7% are the daily commuters, the daily riders. The 1% are the ones who will ride in the snow and all weather. And there's 33% of people who are like, no way, no how, I'm never gonna hop on a bike for any reason. Totally fine. But what I wanna reach is that 60% right there. Next one, please, Mary. So who are we going to encourage to ride? We know that congestion is a problem, greenhouse gas emissions are a problem. These are not going to be solved by COVID. It's actually going to probably be exacerbated by a lack of transit ridership, and people are going to be hopping in their cars. So we need to encourage people to go out and ride. I really like this slide because it shows who we are building our stress level for in terms of being out on bikes. So I have a goal of the young lady on the right. I met her at the Lawrence Ciclovia. It was an open streets event. She came out and learned how to ride that bike for the first time, 2 wheels, first time ever. I know the bike's too small. I know she's not in a helmet. That's besides the point. But we need to build infrastructure for young ladies like her to ride around. Thank you. However, what we're seeing out there on the roadways typically do not allow young ladies like her to be riding safely. These are just 3 different snapshots of infrastructure that's common. We have the Sharrow, we have a bike lane with even like a little bit of a paint buffer, which I call a puffer, to separate a little bit of dooring. But you can see that it does nothing to prevent interactions between vehicles and bicyclists. And especially in the bottom, of course, you have the door zone bike lanes. This is the current state of a lot of the road infrastructure that's out there. But what we are seeing in the time of COVID is infrastructure opportunities that are low cost, low lift, and actually encouraged by communities to really slow down traffic. So a couple of examples. On the top left, we have from Neighborways. That's a rendering. It's not a real shot, but it's what is being proposed in a lot of slow streets areas, which is basically a small block party style of let's get the pressure valve so that families aren't necessarily cooped up in their house. They can go out in their street. The top right is from Brookline. What they've done is expanded a sidewalk space around the business districts, around pharmacies and grocery stores on the way to Longwood Medical Hospital for the purposes of physical distancing, mainly for pedestrians, but then it also has the added benefit of creating a protected bike lane as well. And that's just removing a parking lane and allowing people to go out in the streets. You can see just one cone in this photo. It's a low lift. On the bottom right is from the DCR Parkways. I believe this is Linway. And this is the DCR removed parking in an effort to reduce the amount of induced demand of going to the beaches. However, by removing parking and putting down barrels, you actually had the added benefit of creating a protected bike lane. I actually was riding on this bike lane the other week. It's lovely. I'm not near people who are jogging and walking, and I feel completely protected and completely safe. This could be rolled out in an evening, you know, and we know that these infrastructure challenges are out there. And then a bottom left is actually from Portland, from another, just a pop-up bike lane campaign. But you can see the idea with the slide is that low stress infrastructure can be built with low cost and low lift if you get the buy-in. So where do we get buy-in? I just have this slide as an example of municipal buy-in from a state concept. The Complete Streets program, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a way that municipalities can basically get to the level of design standards that Mass DOT has, which are arguably some of the best in the country, done by this rendering on the right of the idea of protecting pedestrians, protecting people on bikes, physically separating them from moving traffic. And the idea of Complete Streets is that municipalities can use state funding on local roads if they adhere to Complete Street standards. This was a game changer for our Commonwealth because we have 351 municipalities. That means there's 351 ways to argue about bike lanes and parking lanes and pedestrian ways. So this is a way to get everybody on the same page, and they use funding as the mechanism. I don't necessarily think Complete Streets is a way to implement COVID response, but I do think that there's an example to be set with Complete Streets where a standard that is set by the state can be adopted by municipalities and get everybody elevated to the same level. And then lastly, my last slide here. I know I'm jumping around a lot, but I have a lot to cover. Oh, this formatting was bad. My apologies. I'll talk you through it. These are some of the statewide legislative efforts that are going into a lot of stuff that Jonathan, Jeff, and the Colonel were talking about. We have automated enforcement, which is a Senate bill, which is currently in hearing. It's probably going to be pushed back to next session. It's filed by Senator Brownsberger. The idea of enacting a law to allow municipalities to do automated enforcement for traffic infractions, speeding, turning right on red where it's not allowed, passing a school bus when the post signs are up. Just as an example, it's hit or miss throughout the country of where it's being implemented, but where it has been implemented, we have seen speeding reductions and serious crashes have fallen. I come from the outskirts of DC where automated enforcement is a very common practice there. It's fine. I actually got a ticket once for running a hard yellow. It encourages a adherence to the law without actually forcing an interaction of a police officer with a driver, which for COVID response is actually super important. And then also for bias and unequal enforcement is also an important aspect too. So there's a little bit of equity and enforcement practices that can come with automated enforcement. This bill is sitting in the Senate right now. Second one that you can't see is an act to reduce traffic fatalities, which would require side guards on large trucks that were, thank you, I'll jump real quick, that are leased to the Commonwealth so that turning trucks are no longer likely to roll over pedestrians and cyclists. And that's a Senate bill that passed unanimously and it's now sitting in the House Ways and Means. And the last one is the hands-free bill, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. I want to thank definitely the hard work of Jeff Larson and all of our Vision Zero Coalition and the police forces that are out there and AAA for pushing this bill. This was a huge huge step into making our Commonwealth safer. As we saw already this year, we've had one fatal crash in our roads in Ipswich where the driver has been cited for having a digital device in her hands at the time. This is going to be a crucial step for education to encourage drivers to drive safely, and then enforcement so that when incidents and fatal crashes do happen, there is a little bit of teeth to the matter to really enforce it. And I don't want to go the prosecutorial route if possible. Again, this is about an education campaign, but this is about preventative measures. So these are just 3 of the statewide efforts that are happening that are currently sitting in the State House that Mass Bike and others in our Vision Zero Coalition, including Walk Boston, are pursuing. I know that was a lot to throw into a presentation, so I appreciate you allowing me the 5 minutes there, Mary, and I'll turn it back.
Galen, thank you. Great slides, great illustrations, the dooring, all of the hazards that you face out there on the roadways as cyclists. I'm interested in the point that Jeff made previously, which is that as perhaps not as many people decide to take the T amidst coronavirus, that we'll have more people commuting to work on their bikes, more cyclists out there. So just real quickly as a follow-up before we get to Stacy and the pedestrians, what safety advice do you have for all road users, motorists, pedestrians, cyclists, to make sure that we can all protect ourselves more effectively when more of us are going back to work?
Well, the biggest is, of course, awareness and just being aware and patient when you're out there. Slowing down definitely falls into the speeding category, but then it's also the distracted driving that we need to combat. So being aware of others, which I think at a time of COVID is a message that is getting across. I'm wearing a mask to protect you, knowing that I might be a carrier, for instance, or if I'm going to protest, an unjust social system, it's doing it not necessarily for me, but for others. So I think we can kind of take that sentiment to the level of the street. Practically, I think it's slowing down, it's having patience and being predictable when you're out there. So especially for cyclists, if I'm going to speak just to cyclists, you really need to be as predictable. So that means lights, reflectors, and being noticed when you're out there. And then, of course, following the rules of the road, but then being hyper aware and vigilant of there are a lot more people that are out there. Some people are concerned about proximity due to COVID. Some people are concerned about the roadways due to speeding and lack of traffic. So it really does come around to that we are not alone in this world, and our actions definitely have severe repercussions for our whole society, which I think is extra reinforced by some other concurrent examples that we're facing.
So true. We all have to prioritize our own safety, the safety of our passengers and of everybody else, all other road users. So a great point. So Galen, thank you for that. I know you have to jump off early at about 10 of 12 to lead another webinar. You're a popular man today. So if we don't get back to you, thank you. And feel free to jump in later on when Stacy concludes. So last but certainly not least, we now move to Walk Boston's Stacy Butel, who will bring us the pedestrian perspective. And Stacy, thanks so much for being with us. Just as we're seeing more cyclists out there, we're seeing a lot more people walking. I know I'm seeing people walking constantly all day long in my neighborhood. So what advice do you have to pedestrians out there to stay safe? We've seen thousands and thousands of protesters on the streets of our Commonwealth over the past week. So we have that additional concern as well. What are your concerns around the speeding issue, around the distraction issue, and what is your advice to pedestrians?
Well, first of all, thanks, Mary, to you, and thanks to all of the other panelists who have been giving their perspectives on how this COVID-19 crisis has been affecting speeding and just generally individual behavior around traveling. As you mentioned, more and more people are out walking and biking than ever before. And more people, from our perspective as Walk Boston, which we're a statewide pedestrian advocacy organization that works to promote walking and to make Massachusetts more walkable. It's amazing to see the number of people that are now identifying themselves as people who walk. That's not something that people have often done. But with that, what they're also realizing is that never before have they realized that sidewalks are only 4 to 5 feet wide, when all of a sudden all of us have to be physically distant, right, from 6 feet. So what's happening, and one of my major concerns around speeding and more people walking, is that in order to uphold those physical distancing guidelines of 6 feet and having relatively narrow sidewalks in a lot of locations, people are choosing to walk in the travelway or in the road to give those other people that are also potentially passing them or walking along those sidewalks the space that they require, that they deserve, given the current public health crisis. So combine that with drivers that are driving more quickly, it's a deadly combination. And we've seen pedestrian fatalities occur in the last few months, and some of which are directly related to speeding. If we talk about what happened or what is allegedly happened in Lowell with the drag racing that killed 2 pedestrians that were on the sidewalk. So my advice to pedestrians, just as similar, or people walking, just as similar to what Galen is awareness. And I think it goes without saying that we need to think of all road users, right? So drivers, people walking, people biking, all of us need to be more aware. And really, you know, this is the time, if any, to be empathetic with those that are around you and to identify as each person there, so that we can all together be safe and get through this crisis together. I welcome and was happy to see some of the slides that Galen had put forth in terms of opportunities to put pop-up bike lanes, opportunities to expand sidewalks, and as we continue to move through and begin to reopen in the slow way that we are, there are going to be opportunities for using those sidewalks, for using those empty parking lanes for activities that will help our businesses and help our economy survive this crisis. So I just think, you know, given the fact that traffic speeds are increasing, I think, you know, times have definitely changed, but speed limits haven't, and we need to remember that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that this proliferation of more pedestrians, more walkers, more cyclists will pave the way for some of these engineering changes, structural changes, and hopefully societal changes as well that you're talking about. But Stacey, I have to say, I'm glad you brought up the drag racing issue, and you mentioned the incident in Lowell and 2 pedestrians. And Colonel, I'd like to bring you in on this conversation. We've not only heard reports of people speeding in excess of 100 miles an hour, but there have also been a number of reports of increased incidents of drag racing in Massachusetts currently. Can you talk about that, what you're seeing out there and what your concerns are?
Sure. It's certainly something that we've been seeing. So we take the cellular calls at the barracks. They report out to us what the motorists are seeing. And they are frequently reporting, you know, groups or 1 or 2 vehicles, you know, that will be racing down the interstate. It presents a very real problem, obviously, for the motorists, and then obviously for the troopers that are responding to try to catch up to these events and stop them. I think tied to the drag racing notion is one of the things that we've seen an uptick in, from our perspective, is in the area of pursuits that we're involved in. When we try to effect a motor vehicle stop, we're finding more and more people are engaging us in fleeing. They just simply refuse to stop, and then we have to make a calculation whether we want to engage that individual in a pursuit, whether the benefits of that pursuit outweigh the risks, and frequently they do not. I know that in 2019 we had 120 pursuits year to date. If you look at this year, we're up to 142 pursuits. So I think, you know, you can draw your own conclusions, but my guess is motorists are seeing the open roads, calculating their opportunity, and utilizing it and taking that as an opportunity to flee from the police. And so we've seen that in concert with the drag racing. Frequently, when we see the drag racing at extremely high rates of speed, we're not going to even engage in that. We'll call ahead. We'll try to make the stop. You know, the radio is always faster than the cruiser. We don't try to replicate that dangerous driving behavior and create a greater risk. But wherever we have an opportunity to act decisively, we will, because we understand the very real consequences of it, and that. The double fatal pedestrian accident on Pawtucket Boulevard in Lowell is a perfect and recent tragic reminder of that.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because again, people have to remember that when they're speeding, not only do they endanger themselves and others and their passengers, but then they also involve police who have to travel at high speeds to apprehend them. So I think that's a terrific point to make for people out there who may be tempted during this time of open roads. We have another audience poll. We're going to open up this discussion to questions, but first, I do have a question for you, Colonel, and for Jonathan Gulliver. from Emily Stein, who's the president of Safe Roads Alliance in Massachusetts. And she says that she has noticed reports of a 50% increase in motorcycle fatalities in the month of May in Massachusetts. I'm wondering, first of all, if you can confirm that. We may have some motorcyclists in our audience today who are joining us for the town hall. And is this uptick in motorcycle crashes related to speed and distraction? Once again, Jonathan, do you want to take a crack at that first?
So we've definitely seen, I mean, anytime you get the good weather, motorcyclists start coming out. We've seen a number of crashes with them. It's too early to say that's been an uptick compared to prior years. We don't have the full data set. So at this point, it's really anecdotal. But I can tell you too, if you're a motorcyclist and you're out on the roadways, you need to be mindful of a couple of things beyond somebody who's behind the wheels of a car. This has been a very difficult year, not just for the highway division, but for many local cities and towns in keeping up with normal roadway maintenance. So you're going to encounter a lot more road sand out on the roadways right now than you normally would. A lot of communities, including MassDOT, we're catching up with that maintenance from early on, where things really went haywire in early March. So there's some road maintenance that folks are starting to catch up on now. But if you're somebody who's a motorcyclist, you need to be careful of some things that are going to be on the roadway that you wouldn't normally encounter in a regular summer.
That's a very, very good point, for sure. And, you know, I know we've all worked together as stakeholders. I know AAA has been involved in the Work Zone Safety Initiative in Massachusetts in recent years. So a great point to be made for motorcyclists as well as those who are out there working hard on our roadways, trying to improve our roadways for all of us. So thank you for that. So let's try another quick audience poll that relates more to pedestrians and cyclists. And Alec, if you can put the poll up on your screen, you should see it pop up. We are asking, in your opinion, whether you are a driver, a pedestrian, or a cyclist, what is your bigger safety concern? So please select one. Is it speeding drivers, or is it distracted drivers? And just take a few minutes to answer that poll, and then we will give you the results to that. Okay, and again, anybody who may be having trouble selecting an answer, if you reconfigure your screen a little bit, if you switch back and forth on your screen size, you may find that it's easier to answer the question. Okay, so it looks like speeding drivers. Now, wait a minute. Let me just move my control panel. That's very interesting. So 83% of you in our audience say that distracted drivers are the bigger hazard out there, and 18% say speeding drivers are the hazard. Wow, so I'm glad we've talked about distraction today, because obviously the combination of speeding and distraction is extremely important. So before we move on to audience questions, we already have a question. Any comments from our panelists about the fact that we have 83% of our audience more concerned about distraction than speeding? Jeff Larson, you want to take on that question?
Hey, yeah, so no, I'm not surprised. Distraction has been a problem for a very long period of time. You know, because the traffic volume is down, a lot of people who are out on the roads just may not be seeing the problem with speeding drivers. So it's both are clearly problems. Speeding is one of those issues that has taken flight in the last couple of months in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. So it's a little bit newer. So it's not surprising that that's the result you see in the poll.
Okay, so Jeff, thank you. Let's get to our audience questions. So we have our first question from Jerry Sibley, who has been an advocate for the new hands-free law, lost his son in a distracted driving crash. And Jerry would like to know if we have any kind of information, Colonel and Jonathan Gulliver, on the numbers of citations issued in terms of the demographics. Is it younger people who are speeding or older people who are speeding? What's the situation there? What can you tell us?
From the MSP perspective, I think it's a little early to tell. You know, we really, that COVID decrease or that hit came really, as you all know, really with the rollout of the distracted driving. So our enforcement efforts were hampered to do that. So we really haven't been out. We've been out there. We've been enforcing it as part of our various programs and initiatives. But we're still waiting to see where that data, what the trends are, and what the numbers will be. I suspect that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to be returning more to a proactive kind of there'll be a new normal, but we'll be getting closer back to normal as far as our enforcement efforts. There are other recent events that have pulled our state police resources in other directions. I would envision that within the next 2 weeks, we'll be really returning and focusing on highway safety and in the enforcement of those. And we're looking forward to conducting more education and more enforcement centered on the hands-free and distracted driving issues. So I think we'll have a much better sense probably within 1 to 2 months here.
And Jerry said we would like to know as of, go ahead, I'm sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
I was going to say, if I could add to what Chris was just saying, we don't have the full data set to really do the breakdown of it yet either, but I will say, I'm somebody who drives 40 plus miles a day on a regular basis, just one way. And it's unfortunate in some ways that the timing of COVID-19 was when it was, because I can tell you it was pretty impressive to see Commonwealth drivers almost immediately when the law took effect. You saw the cell phones go down. As somebody who's, and I'm on the road early, and it's predominantly the turnpike. And for years now, you'd see the glow in the car, and that went away overnight with the rollout of the new law. So I'm very hopeful that as things start to get back to normal, that people are going to return to really putting the cell phone down and driving safely and not distracted. I know they can do it. They've done it once, so I know as things change, we're hopeful that we're going to see that happen again.
Just as a follow-up to you, Administrator, looking at those poll results with the concerns about distraction, are you worried that when things start to get a little bit more back to normal, more cars on the road, more bikes on the road, more people walking, that we will see that distraction becomes in reality a greater problem and speeding is curbed because of the fact that there will be a little bit more congestion gradually building up?
Yeah, I think pre-COVID-19, it was clearly the number one issue that we were concerned about. And as traffic returns, it definitely will be again. I think the issue that we're seeing with speeding right now, it's a little bit hard to say exactly when traffic is going to return. We've certainly seen an uptick in congestion just over the last few weeks, about 5% week over week in the last 2. And that's a trend I think is going to continue, but I'm not sure where if we will end up at pre-COVID-19 levels. But I do think that distracted driving, it's a concern for everybody. I'm not surprised, as Jeff is, that it was the number one issue that people came up with in our quick poll, because it really does put everybody in a vulnerable position when they're on the roadway. It doesn't matter what kind of a road user you are. If you have a distracted driver near you, you are at risk. And so that's something that we want to continue to eliminate.
Well, certainly an interesting revelation for today, which is why we're looking for input from the audience. So we appreciate that. So speaking of our audience, and Stacy Butel, I want to bring you in on this one as well, because we want to hear some more from you on the pedestrian perspective. But we have a question from our friend Cynthia Rogers, longtime safety advocate in Massachusetts with whom we've worked. And by the way, she says, great presentation. Thank you all. She wants to know if any of you are aware of creative and effective community-driven efforts, environmental, legislative, or educational in Massachusetts or elsewhere that can be shared. So Stacy and Jeff, maybe you want to talk a little bit about this. Stacy, I don't know what kind of educational efforts you've been disseminating among your membership, for example.
Education efforts, I'm not sure if it's regarding the issues around speeding and walking or ways of staying safe or what the specific messages are. But we've really been talking about, at least during COVID-19, the issues around making sure that people get out and are able to make those trips safely, to walk safely to essential trips, maintaining those distances. And we've been working hard across the state to try to help municipal staff and others whose capacities are really at the max right now, given all of the other demands, to think about ways of expanding sidewalks, of creating those bike lanes that we've talked about. And so there are many different efforts out there that have some funding attached to it in order to do that, which is something that we're looking forward to and hoping that others can do that, both again to think about the small businesses, those Main Street businesses that make communities walkable can survive, and then also to provide people with that ability to move around while observing the public health effects that are in place. But as far as specific campaigns, I was interested to see both the EOPS MassDOT campaigns around speeding right now. Those are exciting to see that those are being launched. So I don't know if Jeff wants to add to that.
Yeah, Jeff, good segue to you. Why don't you tell us what you're seeing in response to your Help Our Heroes campaign?
Well, I think people are starting to take it seriously. I think people are starting to recognize that speeding is a problem. In response to the question, I just wanted to note the Highway Safety Division, the Office of Grants and Research Highway Safety Division, in this past year had a new grant that we did, which was specifically, it's a community grants. There's smaller grants for community organizations in local cities and towns to develop road safety programs, and we hope that those will bear some fruit. We're going to be doing that same program in the next fiscal year, which starts on October 1st, where we're going to do the same kind of activity to try to develop community-based programs that can hopefully bear some fruit and keep roads safe in local community towns. So if somebody's interested in funding for a community activity, then reach out to me and we can certainly provide you more information on how you can receive some funds and apply for a grant.
Okay, that sounds good. So hopefully you will get some follow-up on that. So we're just about at the end of our program. I'm going to send one last question from our audience to you, Colonel Mason, and that is, you've been doing speed enforcement, obviously seatbelt enforcement, new campaign coming this weekend, which hopefully a lot of drivers, all drivers out there will be paying attention to you. The question is, do you expect to do more distracted driving enforcement as that becomes more of an issue going forward?
Absolutely. So, the message we want the motoring public to recognize and understand is that we're out there, that we're open for business as usual. We're going to be out on the roadways of the Commonwealth. We'll be enforcing the laws, and particularly we recognize the risks that are associated with the distracted driving. So we'll be looking to enforce and educate on the hands-free law as we move forward here. And as I said, I think our enforcement posture and capabilities will increase over the next 2 weeks as other events die down. And so we're really looking forward to focusing on that. And as the summer driving season comes, I think that will be a good opportunity to bring those two, the increased traffic and the increased education and enforcement. All of that will dovetail together, I hope, to provide for safer roadways for the Commonwealth.
Well, we wish you the best of luck. And again, let's stay safe on the roadways, right? So that we can keep our healthcare heroes with more resources available to those who really need them due to coronavirus right now. So we are coming up on the noon hour. I have to say this has been a really terrific and enlightening conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. A big thank you to our audience. Our audience questions are at an end, so perfect timing. We appreciate you responding to the polls. I cannot thank our panelists enough for your time and preparation on a week which again has been challenging for all of us here in Massachusetts. I want to thank our tech gurus behind the scenes for the great slide work, etc., Alec and Mark Shieldrop. Please email us or tweet us with your comments to this live event at AAA Northeast, or like us on Facebook or Instagram. And everyone, stay safe out there, not just when it comes to your health. Stay safe on the roadways as well. And please prioritize the safety of others. Remember, we're all talking hands-free in Massachusetts these days, as we've said, when we're not Zooming at home, right, or on GoToWebinar in this case. Thank you all for joining us. A big thank you to our audience of about 80 to 100 people today who've been with us, as well as to our panelists. Good luck with the continued enforcement. And we all know it's about education, awareness, and enforcement, and we all need to work together. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to future programs on these topics, these very vital topics for safety, and have a great rest of your day. I'm Mary McGuire for AAA Northeast. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Great job.
Thank you.